After yet another country drops its recognition of Taipei in favor of Beijing, how big is a setback this to Taiwan's leader Tsai Ing-wen, and what message is Beijing sending? And now that the U.S. has another Secretary of State who has just completed a whirlwind tour of the Middle East, does this signal a major shift in American foreign policy in that region? Welcome to The Point. Live from Beijing, I'm Li Xin. Taiwan is experiencing another so-called diplomatic setback, with the Dominican Republic on Tuesday announcing it would drop its recognition of Taipei and establish diplomatic relations with Beijing. The Caribbean country is the third country to recognize the One China principle since the Taiwan leader Tsai Ing-wen took office in May 2016. That is following Sao Tome and Principe and Panama. A legal consultant to the Dominican presidential office said in an announcement that the change in foreign policy was based on the nation's needs, potential and future prospects. So far, 19 countries still maintain so-called diplomatic relations with the island of Taiwan. So is this series of diplomatic breaks a major blow to the Tsai Ing-wen administration? What messages is mainland sending out to the authorities in Taiwan? And which country might be next in the list? Joining us in the discussion today are Gregory Yingnien Tsang, Taiwan current affairs commentator, and Zhong Houtao, research fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Gentlemen, welcome to the studio. So actually, the Dominican Republic has had this so-called diplomatic relations with the island Taiwan for 77 years. So why now, Mr. Tsang?
There's a Chinese expression, 形势比人强. The reality would overpower the entity itself. In this case, that's Taiwan, because Dominican Republic has made the decision, deciding it's essential for its country to shift its diplomatic relations to the mainland, because that's more beneficial to the national interests. The use of the term historically, economically, and socially, that's the move to make. So this is the most important and extraordinary move to make to benefit Dominican Republic, so that's their choice at this time.
What is the consideration in your eyes, Mr. Zhong, of the choice of Dominican Republic to come back to China and at this particular moment?
I think it is a kind of international trend or historical trend, since in the of all the UN members, about more than 90% have already recognized the Chinese mainland or recognized Beijing authority, and
as the sole legal representative
exactly
of the whole of China.
So the Dominican just follow this trend. So I think this is just as Professor Zhang said, it is of its own national interest. And another reason is that it is just a desire or aspiration of its own people, since the Chinese mainland is the second largest importer of Dominican Republic. So this, in this way, then this country could share more opportunity from Chinese mainland.
A couple of details here I want to clear out. For instance, who approached who in this matter? Did Dominican Republic approach China and express its will to establish diplomatic relations, or did China go after Dominican Republic? Do we know?
I'm not sure, but from my perspective, I think it is the Dominican Republic just want to have a good relationship with the Chinese mainland. It is of its own national interest, of its desire or aspiration of its people. So it is totally wrong for Taiwan authorities said that the Chinese mainland is buying this country. I think it is actually not Chinese mainland buying this country, it is Taiwan buying this country. For example, as we know, just several months ago, Taiwan has already donated about $35 million military equipment to this country. I just want to maintain the so-called diplomatic relationship.
So that's another detail we want to get to. after what Taiwan has offered to Dominican Republic, still the announcement was made, and Taiwan was given 1 hour notice, and it was not some foreign minister or other high-level government official who announced this news, but the legal advisor to the president. Mr. Tsang, your take?
Well, let me add a point to the question asked before. I think it's a mutual choice. Like in a marriage, you cannot force two persons to get together, become husband and wife, unless they both agree this is the thing to do. The same is true in this situation. I think both parties, China and the Dominican Republic, has their own reason why this move is essential for the national interests. So the claim made by, for example, Taiwan's foreign affairs minister afterwards, saying that we don't care about this lose of this ally because it's a small nation, that is, of course, try to make up the loss, sort of a faith-saving statement. So it is a loss for sure. So it is very true that at this point.
But why this news was announced in such a manner? I mean, 1 hour notice, and just after Taiwan offers military equipment sales and offered Humvee jeeps, if I understand correctly.
Perhaps it's an action done purposely to humiliate Taiwan, for example. And for example, years back when the United States severed its relations with Taiwan, also notice very short. So in this case, I understand just the day before, the Dominican government was notified of this change of position. So I think it's done purposely to make the situation more dramatic.
Your take?
Yeah, Dominican just want to have a good relationship or establish its diplomatic relationship with the Chinese mainland or with China, just very secretly and quietly, just to prevent two scenarios. One is Taiwan authority maybe will try to intervene, to interfere in this relationship. Maybe another is that Tsai Ing-wen or Taiwan authority will persuade United States to take leverage against Dominican, to ask Dominican not to have establish its formal relationship with the Chinese mainland. So Dominican just want to prevent these two scenarios.
Okay, so you do it really fast so that no unexpected scenarios can happen. Another thing is actually since since the year 2000, 13 countries which had this kind of so-called diplomatic relations with Taiwan have dropped the status. Right now, Taiwan has about 19 such countries left. And if you look at the pattern over the years since 2000, it seems that over some years the pace was rather fast, frequent,
yes.
And in some years they
slow.
were very slow, maybe one or maybe no.
Yes.
And then since Taiwan came to office, 3 countries we've seen already. So what is behind that pattern, Mr. Zhong?
The history and the reality has already proved that the cross-strait relations is the fundamental basis of Taiwan's the so-called foreign relationship. In Tsai Ing-wen administration at that time, Tsai Ing-wen could
from
not
2000 to 2008.
Exactly. In that 8 years, Taiwan authority could not deal with the cross-strait relationship very well. And that time, about 9 Taiwan's so-called diplomatic relations switched their relation from Taiwan to Chinese mainland. So, but in mind you, administration at that time, Taiwan authority recognized 1992 principle and then consensus,
which
yes.
says there is only one China.
Only one
It doesn't
China.
matter how you call it, but there
Yes.
is one China.
Yes. So at that time, in 8 years, there are only one country, Gambia, switch, cut off its relationship.
Is it because these countries were not active in pursuing their relationship with China's mainland, or was it because the mainland was careful not to upset the kind of very volatile trust that was building up?
I think during Ma Ying-jeou's administration, it's done purposely not to encourage, for example, the shift of recognition from the Taiwan side to mainland China. So there is existing diplomatic truce. And it is very true for two parties. If you have good relations, none of them would be trying to do something purposely to harm undermine the other's interests. So that's why in my administration, the shifting is only one. But of course, Tsai Ing-wen has 3 already happened. and Chen Zhibian had 13. So this is essential to have a good constructive relations across Taiwan Strait to prevent this type of shifting happen very often.
So can we say that the mainland is really sending out a very strong message by accepting more countries who want to establish diplomatic relations with the mainland?
Yes, of course. By establishing its relationship with the Dominica, I think the Chinese mainland is sending a very strong signal to Taiwan authority as well as to Taiwan independent supporters. Especially as for now, the Lai Ching-te is just repeating that he is a very practical worker for Taiwan independence. So it is irritating Chinese mainland. It is touching the red line for cross-strait relationship. The Chinese mainland is compelled to take some measures to fight against those Taiwan independent supporters.
However, will such measure harden the kind of negative feelings of some people on the island about mainland China? Mr. Tsang.
It is very true. For example, whenever Taiwan has lost another quote-unquote ally, it feels bad about it, and we blame mainland China for taking actions.
Does Beijing have a choice, though?
Well, Beijing would let things happen naturally. For example, if a country feels strongly to lean toward mainland China for its own purposes, and on the mainland side, I think it's natural to accept that offer. Why not?
Especially when the trust is not there.
Correct. So this is something you cannot stop because international situation in reality will dictate what happens between two parties, including mainland China and Taiwan and other nations on earth. So.
But according to some public opinion poll in Taiwan, for example, conducted by the Union newspaper, most Taiwan people, just believe that it is the Taiwan authority should be blamed, not Chinese mainland should be blamed. It's just because of Tsai Ing-wen's wrong policy, especially its wrong cross-strait policy.
Finally, 30 seconds, Mr. Tsang. Will this kind of diplomatic shifts affect Taiwan people's getting benefits from the international arena as part of China?
Of course, when Taiwan has narrowed its contacts with the international community, with one country less recognize its existence, is a negative blow. So I think Taiwan should try its very best to build up the nation internally, make it strong enough and good enough to exist. Not worried too much about losing those countries recognizing Taiwan at this point.
Yeah, Mr. Zhong, your take.
As for this question, it should be divided in two categories. So of course, it is for Tsai Ing-wen authority or for Taiwan authority. Of course, it could be marginalized in the international world. Another is for just common people in Taiwan. I think they would have no this case or this issue would have no impact on their daily life. They could continue to enjoy a good visit or travel outside.
Okay, thank you very much to my two guests. We have to leave it there. Taiwan current affairs commentator Gregory Yingnien Tsang and Zhong Houtao from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. And here is my first point. As I said, since 2013, of Taiwan's so-called diplomatic partners have severed official ties with the island, reducing the total number of such countries to 19. And out of the 193 members of the United Nations, about 90% of countries in the world recognize the People's Republic of China as the sole legal government representing the whole of China. For more countries to recognize this fact is surely just a matter of time. The current authorities in Taiwan, which has backed off from the One China consensus reached in 1992 with the mainland, has given Beijing no reason to put off that eventuality. Meanwhile, however, legitimate activities by Taiwan in the international arena as part of China is facilitated, as well as people-to-people exchanges across the Taiwan Straits. You're watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. We'll take a short break and we'll be back right after this. The United States new Secretary of State Mike Pompeo offered strong support on Sunday for longtime U.S. ally Israel during his first official international trip, saying the two countries' relationship has never been stronger. He also delivered a broadside against Iran, calling Tehran the world's greatest sponsor of terrorism and repeating President Donald Trump's threat to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal if it isn't changed. On Monday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu revealed what he said were thousands of secret files that proved that Iran had once covertly pursued nuclear weapons. Pompeo said the information indicates that the Iran nuclear deal signed in 2015 was not built on good faith. So what is going to be Pompeo's impact on this issue and on U.S.'s relationship with the Middle East in general? How is he already acting differently from his predecessor, Rex Tillerson? Joining me are Professor Hamed Mousavi from the University of Tehran, Dr. Doa Erab from the School of International Service at the American University, and Marcel Scheff, CEO of an educational research organization called Impact C, based in Tel Aviv. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Professor Erab, Dr. Erab, let me come to you first. How is Pompeo different to his predecessor from both personal style and from his policy, possibly, if we can tell by now?
Well, I think that's a great question. Mike Pompeo basically is bringing the State Department back into the policy making in Washington, D.C. circles. So vis-a-vis what's going to happen with the Iran deal, obviously Mike Pompeo is more in line with President Trump on the possible next moves of the United States, which one is either come up with a better deal that would work better for the United States, or B, just decertify the deal and re-impact the sanctions on Iran.
Well, in terms of personal style, which I think is very, very important, we all know that Rex Tillerson had moments where he really didn't agree with the president, and sometimes he made it known. So, Professor Mousavi, observing from Tehran, how do you see the difference in style between the two, and how is that going to impact the U.S.'s policy in the Middle East?
Yes, so the recent changes by Washington in the State Department and also in the National Security Advisor John Bolton, and also Haspel coming in as the new director of the CIA if she's confirmed by the Senate, all of these are seen quite negatively in Iran in the sense that these people are more hawkish than their predecessors, and they seem to be more in tune with Donald Trump's more extreme policies. For example, that he might nuclear deal. Of course, we still don't know what the decision will be, and also we have to still wait and whether the State Department will continue as an important role, as it did during the Obama administration. Because when Rex Tillerson was in the State Department was not really an influential player in Washington.
Okay, Mr. Mousavi, we don't really hear you very well there. We'll try to fix that line. But at the meantime, let me go to Mr. Scheff, who is stationed in Tel Aviv. What does Pompeo's appointment mean for Israel at this particular moment?
Well, of course, it's very early to say. Mr. Pompeo has been in the job a few days. The fact that he came to the region immediately after he was sworn in, I think, is very significant. Also significant, by the way, the televised conference that he did in the State Department. You know that the State Department itself has been somewhat demoralized over the last period of time. I thought that was significant. I thought that would make a difference in relation to their morale. His visit here, not just to Israel, but to other countries which are important strategic allies to the United States, clearly sends a message. And really importantly is not just the Israel-US relationship, but the Saudi-Israel relationship, the Saudi-US relationship. Of course, it's not new that there is a strengthening, a more interesting relationship developing between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And I think there is some, clearly, directionally, we are seeing that play itself out with Mr. Pompeo as well. Listen, he was very clear in relation to the Iran deal. It's an appalling deal. It is a deal which was based on incorrect information supplied by Iran. It does not curtail Iran from researching. It does not curtail Iran from developing missiles, and it does not curtail Iran from acts of support for terrorism all across the region. from Syria to Lebanon, Iraq, and of course Yemen.
Yeah.
And so these are facts which he stated very clearly. I think that's what we need to be looking at.
Let me try to come back to Professor Mousavi there, because we're talking about these files, these so-called files that prove Iran lied during before the Iran deal was signed. Professor Mousavi, how do you look at the kind of you know, Mr. Netanyahu giving this televised speech, and then Mr. Pompeo is right there almost immediately using that information to prove that the Iran deal is a bad one? Professor Mousavi.
Yes, well, first of all, Israel is in no position to determine or actually say that Iran has been complying with the deal or not. According to the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, the only party authorized to certify that Iran has been doing its obligation is the IAEA, which has since 2015 published 10 reports, all of them confirming that Iran has fully complied with the deal. On the other hand, you see that Israel is not even a member of the NPT. They're actually the only country in the region that has a significant number of nuclear warheads. And I don't think even the Americans believe the Israelis, because Mike Pompeo just a few weeks ago told the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that he believed that Iran was not after the bomb even before the deal was signed, let alone after the deal. So I think this move by the Israelis and Netanyahu is essentially a propaganda campaign before the 12th of May deadline, because they are trying to essentially push the Americans to withdraw from the nuclear deal.
Dr. Erab, how do you look at what is going on now? Of course, as Professor Mousavi pointed out, it is not the US or Israel who can decide whether Iran is complying with the nuclear deal or not. But what do you think is the purpose of Mr. Netanyahu coming out with these so-called secret files? And are they building up a case before May the 12th comes?
Well, according to Iranian officials and other experts, these documents are not that new. It was actually being circulated since 2005. So obviously the US has to make a decision between an imperfect deal, which obviously is the JCPOA agreement, that does not necessarily curtail Iran's ambitions for developing ballistic missiles, and it has a limited time frame with not necessarily any long-term check mechanisms, and between a no deal. But in the case of a no deal, I'm not sure whether the Trump administration has any clear-cut policies. So right at that point comes Netanyahu, and Netanyahu's suggestion for Donald Trump, in case he decides to get US out of that deal, is to confront Iran across different countries in the Middle East, and also bring Saudi Arabia into the US camp, as if that could actually be even more closer. But that really is the game plan Netanyahu is trying to convince President Trump to put into action when that time comes, which obviously is May 12th, but it could actually be an earlier date. It sounds like President Trump already had made his decision.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Schiff, do you think that Mr. Pompeo's approach, which is more in line with US President Donald Trump's approach towards issues in the Middle East, for instance, the relocation of the US embassy to Jerusalem, and his very strong opinion about Tehran, do you think that is conducive to finding solution to these long-term problems in that region?
Well, again, it's too early to know what Mr. Pompeo's attitudes are in any great depth or complexity in relation to the Middle East. The embassy move, of course, was conceived before his term. I understood that Mr. Tillerson was also in favor of that. There are, many issues in the region, clearly. The Israeli-Palestinian negotiations are absolutely nowhere. And this, we understand there is a US plan. We're all waiting to hear what that plan is. But I think the Iranian issue is the central issue. Iran is inside Syria, essentially creating an independent armed force there now, not content with arming and supporting Hezbollah inside Lebanon, inside Syria. It has its own, frankly, Iranian army based there now. And so there are changes in the region, and I would think that Mr. Tillerson is aware of this, as we all are, and is considering, you know, what
Mr. Pompeo
should be to, you know, to this Iranian presence. But by the way, in relation to I'm sorry?
It's okay, go ahead, please.
Just to say, in relation to just to say, in relation to the information that Mr. Netanyahu put forward, I think, you know, the point isn't whether Iran is complying or not complying with the agreement. Iran, frankly, doesn't have to not comply with the agreement. It's a fantastic agreement for Iran. As I said, they can continue to build missiles, they can continue the R&D, and most importantly is the sunset clause, which means that in 2025, you know, they will return to building a nuclear arsenal.
We have to leave it there.
Macron said very clearly in Australia just today, the issue of the missiles and the...
Mr. Chef, we're running out of time. I'm so sorry to interrupt you there. I have to leave it there, although I would love to hear the Iranian feedback. But many thanks to my three guests, Professor Hamed Mousavi from the University of Tehran, Dr. Doal Arab from the School of International Service at the American University, and Markel Shev, CEO of an educational research organization called Impact Z in Tel Aviv. And here's a quick point from me here, my personal commentary. With Pompeo having taken over the reins of power from Tillerson as U.S. Secretary of State, one thing is now much clearer for whether you believe it's a good thing or bad. The fact that Pompeo is now in step with his president means the world is now most likely much clearer on the future direction of American foreign policy. In retrospect, Tillerson's departure from that post was well overdue, since the two were sending out conflicting messages. The problem now is that with Trump's strong backing of Israel and Saudi Arabia and his animosity towards Tehran, the likelihood of a major conflagration in the region is now much more likely than ever before. We can only hope that I'm wrong in my pessimism, but I believe we should be prepared for worse things to come in the Middle East. That's all for this edition of The Point with Nilu Shin. Download the application called CGTN to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.